Hi, I'm Michael Lupchurch from Cardstock Warriors, and today we're going to take a look at the Birdmen Army. The Birdmen Army is pretty lightly armored and very fast-moving, elite type force. They've got decent ranged, and they tend to get in and hit hard, but fall fast. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the Army starter rules, and those are the basic abilities that you get for your army at a standard point level. So first off, they have 2 uses per game of Dispel Magic. Dispel Magic works against any ability that has the magic keyword, and that'll be magic in all caps. And if that ability, such as a witch spell or a special ability card that an opponent has, that is a reaction card. So when they use that, you will get to Dispel Magic, which disrupts the use of that ability and negates it. The second one that they have is they have 2 uses of the ancient Birdman Fire Blade. Not to be confused with lightsabers, they're totally not the same thing. But in this case, one of the Birdmen that you have is actually carrying one of these ancient powerful weapons. They will add 3 strikes to their combat for that turn, and those 3 specifically count the enemy as having a defense of 3. So that's what you want to bust out against your heavily armored targets. If you're fighting a dwarven golem or something, you might want to use one of those fire blades to cut through and really get into the enemy. And the last one is they have 2 uses of Tactical Retreat. This is used in the pre-turn phase, so this is the very beginning of your turn before movement starts. And what that will do is allow you to choose one of your engaged units and then move it freely as if it were not engaged. So the enemy does not get to make an attack against you. You just get to basically fall out of combat and retreat. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is talk about all of the supplemental abilities that you can purchase. And so again, with your point value of additional cards, you'll get to buy some of these abilities, and this is more customizable. One of those is called Sleep. It is a magic spell that chooses a disengaged enemy unit, and then they get very tired, and that unit falls asleep and basically does not get to move in the movement phase. A Heroic Death, which is a reaction upon taking a wound. Your Birdman dies a noble, self-sacrificing, and inspiring death. It inspires the rest of the unit to really rally, and it gives you +5 strike for that combat unit. Superior Skill in Battle is a combat, so even though you're outnumbered a lot as a Birdman army, you can take this ability. It allows you to have superior reflexes. So for this turn only, your enemy will gain only half their combat score for their remaining wound tokens. So it helps cut across that outnumbering that you're frequently up against with Birdmen. Scary Accurate, that you choose a ranged unit, which there are several in the Birdmen army, and you can re-roll failures on your strike rolls that turn. And then there are 2 of the more standardized abilities as well, which is Weapon of Power, which allows you to add +1 to your strike rolls. That makes you hit harder. And then Weapon of Fury, which allows you to add an extra 3 strike. And so those are all of the starting abilities that you can purchase to go with your army. Okay, first up is the Hatchling Halberdiers. Haha, get it? Bird, Halberdiers. Yeah, anyway, these guys are pretty fast. They have high command and high strike values. They stay pretty well when they're distressed, and they have an ability called Surprising Speed, which is no matter how prepared you are, the birds are faster than you would expect. On the turn they engage or are engaged by a new unit, they add +2 to their strike value. So it really ratchets up that strike value when they engage the enemy. They also have halberds, which add +1 to your strike rolls. So it will help lower the enemy's defense. Next up, we have the Hatchling Archers. These guys are hatchlings because they have not grown their wings yet. And they are pretty good at shooting arrows, so they carry those. They're lightly defended, so pretty low defense, low strike value. But they do have Born to Shoot, which allows them to choose an unengaged enemy within 30 inches in the front quadrant that you can draw an uninterrupted line to, which is kind of like a line of sight type rule. And they strike 6, which is a very high value for ranged units. Next up, we have the Birdmen Sharpshooters. So these guys are fully grown. They are what ends up happening when you survive in an archer unit for long enough. They have very low strike, standard speed, but they do have a 20-inch fly move that they can use twice per game. Defense is pretty high because they are in few numbers. They're kind of hard to hit, very maneuverable, so it ups their defense and command. They're never distressed and never add attacks for ranks because they're in what we call a loose formation. Again, and as I said, they could fly twice per game, which is that 20-inch move. And they have something called unnerving accuracy. For that, they will choose a unit that any of the friendly units can draw a line to. So they don't even have to really be able to see. And they can strike 4 against that unit. If they can see, though, they do add an additional +1 to their strike rolls, so they can actually hit pretty hard. Next up is the Birdmen Assassins. That's these guys over here. If you survive as a hatchling halberdier, you eventually upgrade yourself to this. Very much like the archers, they can fly twice per game. They have an extremely high strike value of 10, pretty high defense, again, for their loose formation, which they also have, which means they're never distressed, they never add attacks for ranks, so they're always going to be at that 10. They have swift death, which is regardless of turn order, they roll their strikes before anyone else. And they have target the weak points, which allows them to add +1 to their strike rolls in combat. So they hit pretty hard. Next up, we have the Sparrowhawks. So these guys are pretty cool. They fly all the time, so they move at 20. They do have a distress value, but they have a decent strike of 8, defense of 5, so they're pretty hard to kill. They do have arrows, so they can shoot within 15 inches and strike 4. They have a spear charge, so on the turn they engage, they add +1 to strike rolls, which means they hit harder than they do when they try to sustain combat. Because they're mounted, they have all wounds taken against them rounded down. So if you only do 1 wound to them, you actually don't end up removing a model or hurting the unit at all. You have to do 2, 4, or 6, etc. to kill the unit. And they also have something called High Flight, which is once per game. At the end of the ability phase, you can actually remove them from the table, and at the beginning of your next ability phase, place them anywhere on the table. So they soar up, go where they want to go, and then come back down. Very similarly, you have the Birdman Chariot. So this is a Birdman Champion unit. He's never distressed. They do have flight, so they move 20. They have sharpshooters, which strike 4 within 15 inches during the ability phase. Sorry, I'm reading and not keeping my camera steady. They have the Sky is Falling, which is on the turn that they engage, they get an additional 5 strike, and those additional 5 strikes are at +2. And Forest Patrol, which is centuries of patrolling allow them to add +1 to normal strike rolls. They've been preparing for battle their entire lives. Next up, we have the Birdman Wizard. He's sitting over here with his bands of power. He's pretty cool. So he can fly twice per game. He's got some wings. But he does have his magic abilities. So these are 3 different abilities. You choose 1 and then roll a d6. On a 2+, he successfully casts one of these abilities. One of those is Hummingbird Swarm. He chooses an unengaged enemy unit within 15 inches. They are beset by hordes of swarms of hummingbirds, and their movement is reduced to 4. Gust of Wind, you choose a unit with flying, which is one of your units, and you can move it an additional 5 inches, which cannot be an engagement move. And So Fast, they choose a friendly engaged unit within 10 inches, and they add +2 strike, so they kind of get a little speed boost. And then we have the Slingshot. The Slingshot has 2 types of ammunition. So when you are first wounded, you'll choose an ammunition type and remove it, and you can't use that ammo again. But while you're at full strength, you can choose between Fire Bombs, which is choosing an enemy unit within 25 inches. You roll a d6, and on a 3+, you strike 2 at +3. So the Fire Bombs hit really hard, but not as many strike rolls. And you can also then fire the Poison Capsule. The Poison Capsule allows you to choose a unit within 25 inches and that you can see. You roll a d6, and on a 3+, you strike against that unit once for every 2 wounds it has remaining. So basically you half the enemy unit. They have 20, then you're striking 10 times, and you will count their defense as 5, period, for the purpose of the roll, no matter what their defense is. So that's kind of a poison type move. And that is a quick overview of all of the starter units in the Birdman Army. I'm going to pan over this guy one more time just so you can get a good look at it. And in just a second, we'll take a look at what an average 350-point force might look like for your Birdman. Alright, so what we're looking at here is what I might take in a 350-point game. So keep in mind, the Birdman Army is an elite army that does a lot of damage per wound token that it has in play. But, you know, they are going to go down a little faster than others. So it's kind of a finesse force. The point values are pretty high for the number of troops that you'll have on the table, but they're all pretty effective. So let me talk through real quick what I've chosen and why. So I've got a whole lot of range in this army. We've got 2 units of these sharpshooters that can kind of hang back out of sight, pepper the enemy. I've also got 2 units back here that have the slingshots. I'm going to use those to pick out heavily armored targets and large blocks of infantry. I've also got 2 units that I'm going to use to block range damage and also deal range damage. They're going to have a higher range than most enemy air archers, so I'm going to keep them back as far as possible and try and block my close combat. I took these guys for some numbers. The halberdiers are pretty effective in combat, and it's the only real large block of units. So if I've got some harried combat that I'm going to need to, do a lot of, or have a lot of numbers involved in, I'm going to want to try and get them in. So I'm going to block with my archers and try and get them in a position where I can add them to that combat. And then I have these 2 flying units here that are the assassin units. I'll use them in combination with my birdmen back here that also have ranged attacks to get behind the enemy, disrupt their movement. Those 2 assassin units I'll throw in any combat. Typically, if I can, get both in at one time. That's going to be a whole lot of damage dealt really fast. And then I've got my wizard back here, and I'm going to be using him to assist getting my guys in the right position and doing the right amount of damage. Now, with this type of army, I'm going to choose my army abilities. I'll probably take Scary Accurate, at least. I will also definitely take Heroic Death to add to some of the strike values that I might get from my smaller units. And then I'll probably take Superior Skill in Battle as many times as I can afford it, just because this is a pretty small force for 350 points that I've chosen here as far as numbers are concerned. So I want to try and offset that because my opponent is going to have a lot more numbers than me. So that is a quick look at what I might choose for a sort of medium-sized game with the Birdmen. Next up, we'll talk about the Witch Kingdoms, Goblins, and Dwarf armies as we move on. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.